Here's a problem where we're multiplying two rational expressions together, and it's important to note that we can't cancel anything out until we factor first. So always be sure to factor first, and then I'll show you how to cancel out. And I also recommend factoring first because if we go ahead and multiply these two together, it'll be near impossible to factor. So I like to get started on one little piece at a time because this is such a big problem. It's a lot of work. So I'm just going to focus on the very top of the first fraction right here. I'm going to find a GCF, factor that out. The GCF is 7z. And then what's left over, when I divide each of the terms on the top by 7z, I have a z left over and a 1 because 7z divided by 7z is 1. Now I'm going to focus on the bottom. So looking at the bottom of this fraction down here, I'm looking for another GCF. The GCF appears to be 4, so I'm going to factor out a 4. When I divide each of these terms down here by 4, I get z plus 2. So we're done factoring out the first fraction, the first rational expression. So let's look at the second part right here. This is a really tricky part. This is probably the hardest part of the problem. We're still multiplying. We're just going to factor the top and bottom. Now, the top, there is no GCF. We're going to factor using a method called difference of squares. And what that means is we have two numbers right here that we can take the square root of, and we're subtracting it. So when you factor with difference of squares, you end up with two sets of parentheses. The square root of z squared is z, so that goes first. Then the square root of 4 is 2. And your signs are always going to be plus, minus. So as long as you had that formula memorized, it's not that bad. It is called difference of squares. In this next part down here, we always start by looking to see if we have a GCF, and we do. Our GCF is z. They all have a z in common. But if you look at it, and I'm going to go ahead and show the work down here. If I factor out a z, I end up with z squared plus 2z plus 1. I can still factor that out. I can use the X factor, box method, whatever you want to call it. Sorry, this program's kind of messing up on me here. And it turns into, I'll write it in a different color so it's easier to see. We have z's in the front, plus 1, plus 1. And the reason why we have that is because when we FOIL it out, we multiply it back out, the 1z plus 1z ends up becoming 2z, and then 1 times 1 is 1. So I'm going to take this part right here, and I'm going to rewrite it in here because it is the same thing. So I end up with z plus 1, z minus 1. So hard part's over. Now comes what I think is the fun part. And the fun part is cancel out everything that is a factor. That whatever you have on the top, you have on the bottom as well. So this is called cross-cancellation. So for instance, I have a z plus 1 here that we're multiplying. We're multiplying the whole thing, so we have to cancel out the whole thing. I also have a z plus 1 on the bottom. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cancel them out. They're gone forever. It's good. So I also have a z plus 2 on the bottom and a z plus 2 on the top. I'm going to go ahead and cancel those out. And let's see, I also have a z here and a z down here. Those get canceled out. And if you look here, the 7 and the 4 cannot simplify, and then we have a z minus 2 and a z minus 1 left over. So our final answer is going to end up looking like 7 times z minus 2, because that's what's left over on the top, a 7 and a z minus 2, over 4 times z minus 1, because that's what we have left over on the bottom. And if you look at all of your answer choices, you'll see that it's not there. So what we did was we made a little mistake, or I should say I made a little mistake. Look back down here. The most common mistake, you see I have z plus 1, z plus 1. I did not write a plus down here. So whenever you see a mistake like that, make sure you go back and look and see what you did wrong. So this is actually a plus. You can use red pen to correct it. this is actually therefore still a plus. We can't cancel anything else out. So our final answer ends up being A. That's a really good learning experience right there. That's why multiple choice is fantastic. So use the multiple choice to help you come up with the right answer and to make sure you did it correctly. We caught our mistake, or my mistake, was this is a z plus 1. I rewrote it as z minus 1. So make sure you double check that, and then A ends up being your final answer.